The blood on his hands had not yet dried when Isaac Elwood made the promise that would define the next 5 years of their lives. His voice hoarse as he pressed his forehead against hers in the dim light of the ranch house parlor. Clara Foster held onto his shoulders with trembling fingers, feeling the warmth of him even as she sensed him slipping away, and when he whispered that he would return for her no matter what it took, she believed him with every fiber of her being. The year was 1878, and Leadville, Colorado was a town caught between its silver mining dreams and the harsh realities of frontier justice, where a man could be accused of murder one day and hanged the next if he did not run fast enough into the surrounding mountains. Isaac had been working at the Foster Ranch for 2 years when Clara's father hired him, a young man of 22 with steady hands and an honest face that made even the most suspicious ranchers trust him with their livestock. Clara had been 18 then, her mother 3 years dead, and she had taken over the running of the household with a competence that belied her youth. The ranch sat 5 miles outside Leadville proper, a sprawling property with good grazing land and a stream that never ran dry even in the hottest summers. Her father, William Foster, had built it from nothing, arriving in Colorado Territory in 1862 when Clara was just a baby, and he guarded it with the fierce possessiveness of a man who knew what it meant to have nothing. Clara had not meant to fall in love with Isaac. She had watched dozens of ranch hands come and go over the years, men who drifted like tumbleweeds from one job to the next, never staying long enough to put down roots. But Isaac was different. He stayed. He learned the name of every horse in the stable, could gentle a skittish mare with nothing but patience and soft words, and when he looked at Clara across the dinner table in the evenings, his dark eyes held a warmth that made her heart quicken in her chest. Their courtship had been slow and proper, conducted under her father's watchful gaze. Isaac would walk with her to check the fence lines in the golden hours before sunset, and they would talk about everything and nothing, their shoulders sometimes brushing as they navigated the uneven terrain. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 brothers, and how he had headed west after his parents died of fever when he was 19. She told him about her mother, about the loneliness of being the only child on a ranch where the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, about her dreams of having a family that would fill the empty rooms of the house with laughter and life. William Foster had approved of the match, or so Clara had thought. He had even suggested that come spring of 1879, they might consider a wedding, that Isaac had proven himself worthy of both the ranch and his daughter. Clara had gone to sleep countless nights imagining that future, seeing herself in a simple white dress, Isaac's ring on her finger, the two of them building a life together on the land she loved. Then came the night that changed everything. Marcus Dwyer, a neighboring rancher whose property bordered the Foster land to the east, had been found dead in a ravine, his skull cracked open and his pockets empty. The sheriff, a man named Tom Bradford who had a reputation for quick judgments and quicker trigger fingers, had immediately suspected foul play. Dwyer had been known to carry large sums of money on him, the proceeds from his recent cattle sale, and when that money disappeared with him, the whole town started whispering about robbery and murder. Isaac had been one of the last people to see Dwyer alive. He had encountered the man on the road between the 2 ranches late that afternoon, had exchanged brief words about the weather and the quality of the grazing grass, and had continued on his way back to the Foster place. But when the sheriff came asking questions, other witnesses emerged, men who claimed they had seen Isaac and Dwyer arguing, voices raised in anger. Clara knew it was a lie. Isaac did not have a violent bone in his body, and he had no reason to harm Dwyer, whom he barely knew. But the witnesses were friends of Dwyer's son, Robert, a cruel young man who had made his interest in Clara uncomfortably clear on more than one occasion, and who had not taken kindly to her choosing a ranch hand over him. The night the sheriff came to arrest Isaac, Clara's father had done something she could not comprehend. Instead of defending Isaac, instead of vouching for his character and his whereabouts, William Foster had remained silent. He had stood in the doorway of the ranch house, his face carved from stone, and watched as Sheriff Bradford put Isaac in irons. Clara had screamed, had begged her father to say something, to tell them that Isaac had been home all evening, that he could not possibly have killed Dwyer. But her father had simply turned away, and in that moment, Clara felt something break inside her that she was not sure would ever heal. Isaac had looked at her as the sheriff led him away, his eyes full of a desperate urgency. She had run to him, ignoring Bradford's barked order to stay back, and Isaac had leaned down to whisper fiercely in her ear. He told her he was innocent, that he would prove it somehow, but that right now he had to run because he would not get a fair trial in Leadville, not with Robert Dwyer's lies poisoning every potential juror. He told her he loved her, that he would come back for her, that she should wait for him at the ranch. He promised he would return, even if it took years, even if he had to cross the entire country to clear his name. Clara had helped him escape. She was not proud of how she did it, of the sleeping powder she slipped into the sheriff's coffee when he stopped at the ranch the next morning to ask more questions, of how she had stolen the keys from his belt as he slumped over the kitchen table, of how she had ridden through the pre-dawn darkness to the makeshift jail in town and freed Isaac from his cell. She had given him her father's best horse, a dun gelding with speed and stamina, and a bag of provisions that would last him a week if he rationed carefully. She had kissed him one last time in the pale gray light of morning, tasting salt from both their tears, and then she had watched him ride south toward the mountains, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared entirely. The consequences had been immediate and severe. Sheriff Bradford had been furious, threatening to arrest Clara herself for aiding a fugitive, but her father had intervened then, finally, paying a substantial fine and promising that his daughter would face appropriate discipline. The discipline, as it turned out, was a kind of house arrest. William Foster forbade Clara from leaving the ranch property, from going into town, from having any contact with anyone who might help her communicate with Isaac. He hired new ranch hands, men he trusted to report back to him about Clara's movements, and he watched her with a wariness that made her feel like a stranger in her own home. Clara accepted her punishment without complaint. She had known what she was doing when she freed Isaac, had understood that there would be a price to pay. But she would pay it gladly, 1,000 times over, if it meant he was safe. She threw herself into the work of the ranch with a fierce determination, rising before dawn to help with the feeding and the mucking, spending long hours in the garden, preserving vegetables for the winter, mending clothes and harnesses until her fingers ached. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, kept her from dwelling too much on Isaac's absence, on the gnawing fear that something terrible might have happened to him out there in the vast wilderness beyond Leadville. The first year was the hardest. Every sound made her heart leap. Every rider approaching the ranch made her wonder if it might be him. But the seasons turned, spring giving way to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to the brutal Colorado winter, and Isaac did not return. Clara marked time by the rhythms of the ranch, by the calving season and the harvest, by the first frost and the last snow. She kept a calendar in her room, crossing off each day with a careful pencil mark, counting down towards some unknown future when Isaac would keep his promise. Her father never spoke of Isaac after that first month. He had made it clear that the subject was closed, that Clara was to forget the man who had brought shame upon their household. But Clara could not forget, would not forget. She wore a ribbon around her wrist that Isaac had given her once, a simple strip of blue fabric that had come from a dress she had sewn, and every morning she tied it in place as a reminder of her commitment to wait, to believe, to hope. The second year brought changes to Leadville. The silver mines were booming, bringing floods of new people to the area, men seeking their fortunes and women seeking those men. The town grew rapidly, sprawling outward in all directions, saloons and shops and boarding houses springing up like mushrooms after rain. Robert Dwyer had taken over his father's ranch, and with his new wealth and influence, he had begun courting Clara in earnest. He would ride out to the Foster place uninvited, bearing gifts of expensive fabrics and imported chocolates, sitting in the parlor and talking endlessly about his plans to expand his holdings, to become the most powerful rancher in the county. Clara received him with icy politeness, never encouraging him, never accepting his gifts, but her father seemed pleased by the attention, and that worried her more than she wanted to admit. One evening in late summer of 1880, William Foster finally revealed what Clara had begun to suspect. He told her that he had given Robert Dwyer permission to ask for her hand in marriage, that it was time she put aside childish dreams and accepted reality. Isaac was gone, likely dead or imprisoned in some distant territory, and she could not wait forever for a man who was never coming back. Robert Dwyer was a good match, her father insisted, wealthy and respectable, and a union between their families would create a ranching empire that would dominate the region for generations. Clara had refused. She had stood in the parlor where Isaac had once promised to return for her, and she had told her father with a calm certainty that shocked them both that she would never marry Robert Dwyer, that she would wait for Isaac Elwood until the day she died if necessary. Her father had raged at her, called her a fool, threatened to disown her, but Clara had not wavered. She had learned something about herself in those 2 years of waiting, had discovered a core of steel beneath her gentle exterior, and she would not bend, not even for the man who had raised her. The 3rd year tested that steel in ways Clara could not have anticipated. William Foster fell ill in the winter, a pneumonia that settled deep in his lungs and would not shake free despite the doctor's best efforts. For weeks, Clara nursed him, sitting by his bedside through long nights, spooning broth into his mouth when he was strong enough to swallow, bathing his fever-hot skin with cool cloths. In his delirium, he spoke of things he had never shared when healthy, of his regrets and his fears. He confessed that he had lied to the sheriff about Isaac's whereabouts that evening because he had been afraid that his daughter would leave him, afraid of being alone on the ranch he had built with his own 2 hands. He had thought that if Isaac was arrested, if he was convicted or forced to flee, Clara would eventually forget him and settle into the life her father had planned for her. Clara had wept as she listened to her father's confession, angry and heartbroken in equal measure. But she had also forgiven him, understanding at last that his cruelty had been born of a terrible loneliness that mirrored her own. When William Foster finally recovered, thin and weakened but alive, something had shifted between them. He stopped pressuring her about Robert Dwyer, stopped monitoring her movements so closely. He never said he approved of her waiting for Isaac, but he no longer actively opposed it, and that was enough. The 4th year brought a kind of peace. Clara had fallen into a rhythm with her life on the ranch, had made a sort of contentment from the daily tasks and small pleasures available to her. She still crossed off days on her calendar, still tied the blue ribbon around her wrist every morning, but the sharp edge of longing had dulled somewhat into a steady ache that she carried with her like an old injury that throbbed before storms. She made friends with some of the women in Leadville, respectable wives and daughters who came to visit on Sunday afternoons, and though they whispered behind their hands about poor Clara Foster who was wasting her youth waiting for a fugitive, they also admired her loyalty, her stubborn refusal to compromise her heart. It was during the 4th year that Clara began to hear rumors about Isaac. They came in fragments, second-hand stories passed along by travelers and drifters passing through Leadville. Someone had seen a man matching Isaac's description working as a ranch hand in New Mexico territory. Another claimed he had gone to California, seeking work in the gold fields. A gambler passing through town swore he had met Isaac Elwood in a saloon in Denver, that the man was trying to gather evidence to prove his innocence, tracking down the real killer of Marcus Dwyer. Clara listened to all these stories with a desperate hunger, clinging to each one as proof that Isaac was alive, that he had not forgotten her, that he was fighting his way back to her. The 5th year began with a harsh winter that buried Leadville under 6 feet of snow and killed half the cattle in the county. Clara and her father and the ranch hands worked themselves to exhaustion trying to save what livestock they could, digging animals out of drifts, hauling feed through chest-deep snow, breaking ice on water troughs until their hands were raw and bleeding. It was brutal work, and more than once Clara found herself wondering if Isaac would even recognize her when he returned. If he would see the girl he had left behind in this weathered, work-worn woman staring back at him from the mirror. Spring of 1883 arrived late and grudging, the snow finally melting in April to reveal dead grass and the carcasses of animals that had not survived the winter. The ranch had taken heavy losses, and William Foster's health had declined again under the stress. But there was also a sense of renewal in the air, of having survived the worst and come through to the other side. Clara planted her garden with a fierce determination, willing the seeds to grow, to thrive, to prove that life persisted even in the harshest conditions. It was on a warm May morning, 5 years and 3 weeks after Isaac Elwood had ridden away from the Foster ranch, that Clara saw a lone rider approaching from the south. She had been working in the garden, her hands buried in rich dark soil, when something made her look up, some instinct that prickled along her spine. The rider was still too far away to make out details, just a silhouette against the bright blue sky. But Clara's heart began to pound in her chest with a certainty that needed no logic or evidence. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt with trembling hands, and walked toward the edge of the garden. The rider came closer, and Clara could see now that he was leading a second horse, a pack horse loaded with supplies. He was tall and lean in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, and even from a distance she could see the way he sat a horse, easy and natural as breathing. Her vision blurred with tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, afraid to believe, afraid to hope. Isaac Elwood reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, and for a long moment, he just looked at her. 5 years had changed him. His face was harder, weathered by sun and wind, his jaw darkened by several days' growth of beard. There were new lines around his eyes, and a scar on his cheek that had not been there before. But his eyes were the same, dark and warm and full of everything Clara had been holding in her heart for 5 endless years. He dismounted with a fluid grace and stood there, 20 feet away from her, his hands loose at his sides. Clara could see that he was afraid that she might have changed her mind, that 5 years was too long to ask anyone to wait. She saw the moment he noticed the blue ribbon still tied around her wrist, saw hope flare in his eyes like a match struck in darkness. "I promised I would return," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am sorry it took so long." Clara did not remember crossing the distance between them. One moment she was standing by the garden, the next she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and horses and the wild open spaces he had traveled through to get back to her. Isaac held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair, and she felt his whole body shaking with the force of his relief. "I waited," Clara whispered against his shirt. "I never stopped waiting." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the bright spring sunlight, and Clara felt all the careful control she had maintained for 5 years finally break apart. She sobbed against Isaac's chest, great wrenching cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. All the fear and loneliness and desperate hope finally finding release. Isaac held her through it, his hand stroking her back, murmuring her name over and over like a prayer. When Clara finally pulled back enough to look up at him, Isaac cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I have so much to tell you," he said. "So much has happened." "Tell me," Clara said, though what she really wanted was for him to kiss her, to prove that this was real and not just another dream that would evaporate with the morning. Isaac seemed to read her thoughts. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Clara rose on her toes to meet him. Their lips met in a kiss that was both familiar and new, sweet and desperate and full of 5 years' worth of longing. Clara's hands fisted in Isaac's shirt, holding him to her, and she felt him smile against her mouth. The sound of a throat clearing broke them apart. William Foster stood on the porch of the ranch house, leaning heavily on a cane, his face unreadable. Clara stiffened, moving instinctively closer to Isaac, prepared to defend him against whatever her father might say or do. But Isaac squeezed her hand gently and stepped forward. "Mr. Foster," he said, his voice steady and respectful. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am asking anyway. I have cleared my name. I have proof of my innocence, and a pardon from the territorial governor. I have come back for Clara, as I promised I would, and I am asking for your blessing to marry her." William Foster studied Isaac for a long moment, his weathered face giving nothing away. Then slowly he nodded. "You kept your word," he said gruffly. "A man who keeps his word is worth something. Come inside, both of you. I want to hear everything." They sat in the parlor, the same room where Isaac had made his promise 5 years ago, and he told them his story. After fleeing Leadville, he had ridden south into New Mexico territory, finding work where he could, always moving, always looking over his shoulder. But he had not just been running. He had been investigating, asking questions, following leads. It had taken him 2 years to track down the real killer, a drifter named Jack Sullivan who had been working for Robert Dwyer. Sullivan had murdered Marcus Dwyer on Robert's orders, a scheme to inherit his father's ranch while Robert was conveniently away in Denver, and to frame Isaac in the process. Isaac had confronted Sullivan in a saloon in Santa Fe, and the man, deep in his cups and eaten by guilt, had confessed everything. Isaac had convinced him to put the confession in writing, had found a lawyer willing to take the statement to the authorities, and had spent the next 3 years navigating the slow machinery of territorial justice. There had been hearings and appeals, investigations and counter-investigations. Robert Dwyer had used all his money and influence to block the process, but eventually the truth had emerged. Sullivan had been tried and convicted, Robert Dwyer had been arrested as an accessory to murder, and Isaac's name had been cleared. "I have the pardon here," Isaac said, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "Signed by the governor himself. I am a free man. I can stay in Colorado without fear of arrest." Clara took the document with shaking hands, scanning the official words and seals that meant Isaac was finally, truly safe. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but she had never quite believed it would really happen. 5 years, she whispered. "You spent 5 years fighting to come back to me. I would have spent 50 if that was what it took," Isaac said simply, and Clara believed him. William Foster cleared his throat. "The ranch has had some hard years," he said, his voice gruff. "Lost a lot of stock in the winter. Could use a good manager, someone with a stake in keeping the place running. Someone who knows the land and the work." Clara looked at her father in surprise, and saw something in his eyes that might have been an apology, an offering of peace. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" she asked. "I am saying that if you and Isaac want to stay on the ranch after you are married, there is a place for you here," William said. "I am getting old, Clara. My lungs are not what they used to be. I need help, and I cannot think of anyone I would rather have running this place than my daughter and her husband." Isaac looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. They had never discussed what would happen if he came back, where they would go or what they would do. Clara had been so focused on the waiting, on the hoping, that she had not let herself think about the future. But now, looking at Isaac in the bright light of the parlor, feeling the solid reality of his hand in hers, she knew what she wanted. "I want to stay," she said. "This ranch is my home. I want to build our life here, if that is what you want too." "I want to be wherever you are," Isaac said. "If that is here on this ranch, then this is where I want to be." They were married 3 weeks later in Leadville's small church, with half the town in attendance. The other half, the ones who had believed the lies about Isaac, who had called for his hanging and supported Robert Dwyer, stayed away, but Clara did not care. She stood at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, and held Isaac's hands in hers as they made their vows before God and witnesses. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart might burst from the sheer fullness of it. The wedding reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, fiddle music floating on the warm June air. Clara danced with her new husband under the stars, his arms strong around her waist, and she felt like she was floating. 5 years of waiting, of hoping, of holding on to faith when every rational voice told her to let go. And here she was, Mrs. Isaac Elwood, with her whole future stretching bright before her. That night, in the room that had been Clara's since childhood and was now theirs, Isaac held her close and told her again and again that he loved her, that he had never stopped thinking of her during all those lonely years. Clara traced the scar on his cheek with gentle fingers, the mark of a knife fight in a Santa Fe alley when someone had tried to keep him from testifying, and she kissed it softly. They had both been changed by the long separation, hardened and weathered by the trials they had endured, but the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by absence and sacrifice into something unbreakable. The years that followed were good ones. Isaac proved to be everything William Foster could have wanted in a ranch manager and more. He had a gift for handling both animals and men, could coax productivity from tired soil and loyalty from suspicious cowboys. The ranch flourished under his stewardship, the herds growing, the land producing. William's health continued to decline slowly, but he seemed content, sitting on the porch in the evenings and watching Isaac and Clara work together with an expression that might have been satisfaction. Clara discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1884, almost exactly a year after Isaac's return. She told him one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, and the look of wonder on his face made her laugh with delight. He placed his hand on her still flat belly with such reverence, such awe, that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," Isaac breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not begin to cover what I am feeling," Isaac said, pulling her into his arms. "Grateful, blessed, terrified." "Terrified," Clara laughed against his chest. "What if I am a terrible father?" Isaac said. "What if I do not know how to do this?" "We will figure it out together," Clara assured him, "just like we have figured out everything else." Their son was born in December of 1884, coming into the world during a snowstorm that seemed determined to bury the ranch. Isaac paced the hallway outside the bedroom while the midwife and 2 neighbor women attended Clara, his face white with fear every time he heard her cry out. But when the midwife finally opened the door and beckoned him inside, when he saw Clara propped up in bed, exhausted and beautiful, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, all the fear melted away. "Meet your son," Clara said softly, and Isaac approached slowly, carefully, as if afraid he might break something precious. The baby was tiny and red-faced, his eyes screwed shut, his miniature fists waving in the air. Isaac reached out with one finger and touched the impossibly small hand, and the baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's finger with a grip that seemed impossibly strong for something so small. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, running through family names and favorite names, never quite settling on anything. But looking at her son, Clara knew exactly what his name should be. "William," she said, glancing toward the door where her father stood watching with tears streaming down his weathered face. "William Isaac Elwood." Her father had died the following spring, passing quietly in his sleep after a winter that had been kinder than the one before. Clara mourned him deeply, grieved for all the years they had lost to stubbornness and misunderstanding. But she was also grateful for the peace they had made in his final years, for the blessing he had given her and Isaac, for the joy he had taken in his grandson. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved. The ranch became theirs fully then, the deed passing to Clara and Isaac jointly. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the family they hoped to grow, modernizing the kitchen with new appliances that made Clara's work easier. They hired more hands, good men who stayed season after season, building loyalty and expertise. The Foster Ranch became known throughout Colorado as one of the best-run operations in the territory, and people came from miles around seeking Isaac's advice on livestock management and Clara's guidance on everything from preserving food to treating sick animals. Their daughter arrived in the summer of 1887, a healthy girl with her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Rose after Clara's mother, and young William, who was 2.5 by then, took his role as big brother with solemn seriousness. Isaac was a devoted father, patient and playful, and Clara would often find him on the floor of the nursery, building block towers for William to knock down or making funny faces to coax smiles from baby Rose. In 1889, they welcomed twin boys, a surprise that sent Isaac into a panic about how they would possibly manage 4 children under the age of 5. But they did manage, with help from hired women in town and the unshakable partnership they had built over years of working side by side. The twins, James and Daniel, were hellions from birth, constantly in motion, constantly getting into trouble, and they kept both parents running. But the house was also full of laughter now, full of the noise and chaos and overwhelming love of a large family, and Clara would not have traded it for anything. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Isaac took Clara on a picnic to the hill where her father was buried. They left the children with a trusted neighbor for the afternoon, a rare moment of solitude, and rode up to the hilltop together. Isaac spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree, and they sat looking out over the ranch, watching cattle graze in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney of their house. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked quietly. "Waiting for me? You could have had a normal life, married someone else years earlier, not wasted 5 years in limbo." Clara looked at her husband, this man who had fought his way across territories and through years of legal battles to keep his promise to her. She saw the lines that time and hard work had etched into his face, the gray beginning to appear at his temples, the calluses on his hands from a decade of ranch work. She saw the man who had held her through nightmares, who had paced the floor with crying babies, who had built a life with her that was richer and fuller than any dream she had dared to have during those long years of waiting. "I regret nothing," Clara said firmly. "Those 5 years were hard, but they taught me what I was capable of, how strong I could be when I needed to be. They taught me that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice, a commitment, something you hold on to even when it would be easier to let go. And they gave us this life. I would wait another 5 years, another 10, if that was what it took to have what we have now." Isaac kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Clara felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt all those years ago when he first looked at her across the dinner table. Some things, she thought, never changed, never faded, no matter how much time passed. They lay back on the blanket together, looking up at the clouds drifting across the endless Colorado sky, their hands intertwined. Isaac told her about plans he had for expanding the northern pasture, about a new breed of cattle he wanted to try. Clara told him about her plans for the garden, about teaching Rose to read, about the letter she had received from one of the women in town asking for her help organizing a proper school for Leadville. They talked about their children, about their hopes and dreams for them, about how quickly the years were passing. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, they packed up the picnic and rode back down to the ranch. The children swarmed them as soon as they walked through the door, William and Rose talking over each other about their day, the twins clinging to their legs. Isaac scooped up James while Clara lifted Daniel, and together they herded the children toward the kitchen for supper. Later, after the children were finally asleep, their little voices quiet for once, Clara and Isaac sat together on the porch swing, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet around them, the comfortable silence of a place at peace. Clara leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, and thought about all the miles they had traveled to get to this moment, all the obstacles they had overcome. "I love you," Isaac said softly, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I love you too," Clara replied, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them, as true as they would be every day for the rest of their lives. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. William grew into a serious young man with his grandfather's head for business and his father's way with horses. Rose became the heart of the family, compassionate and creative, always organizing her brothers into elaborate games and productions. The twins remained inseparable troublemakers, but they were also loyal and brave, the first to defend their siblings or help a neighbor in need. In 1896, Isaac and Clara welcomed their fifth and final child, another daughter they named Grace. By then, William was 12 and already taking on real responsibility around the ranch, and Rose was 9 and mature enough to help with her baby sister. The twins were 7 and wild as ever, but even they gentled around tiny Grace, sitting beside her cradle with unusual stillness to watch her sleep. Isaac was 40 by then, Clara 36, and they had built something remarkable together. The Foster Ranch was one of the most successful in Colorado, known for quality livestock and innovative practices. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up with the kind of security and love that both Isaac and Clara had dreamed of during those 5 years when they were apart. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and economic downturns, and emerged stronger each time. On the 20th anniversary of Isaac's return to the ranch in 1903, Clara stood in the yard and looked at everything they had built. The house had been expanded twice, now a sprawling structure that could comfortably hold their large family and frequent guests. The barns were well maintained and full of healthy animals. The fields were green and productive. Their children, ranging from William at 19 to Grace at 7, were all gathered for a family photograph, fidgeting and laughing as they waited for the photographer to set up his equipment. Isaac came to stand beside her, slipping his hand into hers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Clara said. "All of this. How far we have come." "We have been blessed," Isaac said simply. Clara nodded, watching as William hoisted Grace onto his shoulders, making her squeal with delight. Rose was trying to tame the twins' hair, which was sticking up in all directions despite her best efforts. It was chaos and noise and perfect in every way. "I think about that morning sometimes," Clara said, "when I saw you riding toward the ranch after 5 years. I think about how afraid I was that I was imagining it, that you would disappear like a mirage. I was afraid you would not want me anymore," Isaac admitted. 5 years is a long time. People change. I had changed so much, seen and done things I never imagined I would have to do. I thought maybe you would look at me and see a stranger. I saw the man I loved," Clara said. "I saw the man who kept his promise. That is all I needed to see." The photographer called out that he was ready, and Isaac and Clara joined their children, arranging themselves for the portrait. Isaac stood tall in the back, his hand on William's shoulder. Clara sat in front, holding Grace on her lap, with Rose beside her and the twins kneeling in front. They all looked at the camera, trying to hold still despite the twins squirming, and the photographer counted down before the flash exploded. That photograph would hang in the Elwood house for generations, a testament to a love that had survived separation and doubt, to promises kept and faith rewarded. When Clara and Isaac were old and gray, sitting on that same porch swing watching their grandchildren play in the yard, they would look at that photograph and remember everything it took to get there, every sacrifice and every triumph. But that evening in 1903, as the family gathered around the dinner table for a celebration feast, Clara looked at her husband across the table and saw the same man who had promised to return for her 25 years ago. His face was more lined now, his hands more weathered, his hair streaked with silver. But his eyes were the same, full of love and determination and unwavering commitment. After dinner, after the dishes were cleared and the children had scattered to their various pursuits, Isaac led Clara out to the barn. She followed him, curious, and found him standing beside two saddled horses, the same dun gelding that had carried him back to her all those years ago, now old and gray but still sturdy, and her favorite mare. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, laughing. "Nowhere in particular," Isaac said, helping her mount. "I just wanted to ride with you, like we used to before all this." He gestured at the house, the barns, the whole sprawling evidence of their life together. They rode out across the ranch as the sun set, following old familiar paths through the pastures. They did not talk much, did not need to. They had always been able to communicate in the silence, understanding each other without words. When they reached the stream that marked the western boundary of the property, Isaac dismounted and helped Clara down, and they stood together watching the water flow past, constant and eternal. "Thank you," Isaac said suddenly, turning to face her. "For what?" Clara asked, surprised. "For waiting," Isaac said. "For believing in me when you had every reason not to. For the life we have built together. For every day of the past 20 years. For everything." Clara reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the familiar roughness of his jaw, seeing the emotion shining in his eyes. "You came back," she said simply. "You promised you would return, and you did. Everything else followed from that." Isaac kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, as the first stars began to appear overhead. It was a kiss that held 20 years of marriage, 5 children, countless trials and triumphs, a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was crying, happy tears that Isaac gently wiped away. They rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, their horses picking their way carefully along the familiar paths. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming, full of their family and their future. Clara thought about the young woman she had been, standing in the garden watching a lone rider approach, afraid to hope. She thought about the long years of waiting, of holding on to faith when logic said to let go. She thought about every choice they had made, every sacrifice and every reward. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from a life fully lived, that she would not change a single thing. The waiting had been worth it. The struggle had been worth it. Every moment of doubt and fear had been worth it to arrive at this place, this life, this love that would endure as long as they both drew breath. Isaac and Clara Elwood lived long and happy lives on the Foster Ranch, which everyone in the area came to call the Elwood place. They saw their children grow and marry and have children of their own, filling the ranch with yet another generation. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned losses and rejoiced in triumphs. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never dimming. When Isaac finally passed away in 1922 at the age of 66, Clara was holding his hand, just as she had held it through everything else. She mourned him deeply, wearing black for a year, but she did not truly feel alone because he had left her with so much. 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild by then, all of them carrying pieces of Isaac forward into the future. The ranch he had helped build into something remarkable. The memories of 40 years of marriage, of a love story that had become legend in Leadville and beyond. Clara lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1930 at the age of 70. She was buried beside Isaac on the hill overlooking the ranch, where her father rested as well, and for generations after, their descendants would visit those graves and tell the story of how Isaac Elwood promised to return for Clara Foster, and how she waited 5 years for him at the same ranch, and how that patience and faith had created a legacy that endured long after they were gone. The blue ribbon Clara had worn around her wrist for 5 years, faded and fragile with age, was buried with her, still tied in place even in death. And the ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, a testament to the power of promises kept and love that endures against all odds. The Elwood family thrived in Colorado for over a century, their roots deep in that same soil where Clara had once knelt in the garden and looked up to see her future riding toward her across the golden landscape of the Wild West.